Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, dependent on where you're joining us this lovely day. I welcome you to another edition of our TQ webinar series. Today, we'll be having an introduction to neuroscience, introducing us to the virtual brain with Siddhant Kumarapuram, who's excited. We are super glad and joyful to have you join us this lovely day. But before we proceed, can we all please proceed to the chat sections? Either you're joining on Zoom or you're joining on YouTube. Please proceed to the chat section to introduce yourself, tell us your name, tell us where you're joining from, and then what you hope to also gain in today's webinar. Please note that this session is being recorded, and attending this webinar means that you consent to being recorded as an attendee. Before we proceed, let me also tell us about TechQuest, what we do at TechQuest. So TechQuest is a non-profit organization that provisions education, technology, content, resources, and tools for the delivery of ICT, digital literacy, and STEM programs to young Africans at scale. We believe that STEM is the foundation for modern day economic growth, and equipping young ones with these skills will be critical to Africa's rise, not just Africa now, even global rise in the digital economy. I would also introduce Siddhant, our facilitator for today's webinar. Siddhant is a student of cell biology and neuroscience and psychology at Rutgers University in New Brunswick. And he's also a research assistant at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical Center in New Jersey in the United States. Siddhant's passion for the brain developed in high school as a member of the Brain Bee Club. And while leading this initiative, he realized how daunting the subject could seem to students at his age and younger. However, upon venturing into the subject, he became intrigued by the brain's connection to technology, to medicine, and to daily life, and realized the potential for the vast field of neuroscience to encourage scientific curiosity among young students at a young age. After Siddhant worked with the Brain Bee Club to host their first outreach event and experienced how fascinated students and parents crowded around their brain station, he launched the Brain Bunch. The Brain Bunch helps students to explore STEM fields, exposing students to the science behind their brains and fostering love for education. Can you all please join me to welcome Siddhant Kumarapuram, our facilitator for today's webinar. You're welcome, Siddhant. We are glad to have you join us this lovely afternoon here, but morning at your end.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the introduction. I look forward to educating you all about the brain, and I hope you learned something from this session, and hopefully you can take away something new after this. Thank you very much.
Awesome, Siddhant. We're glad to have you join us. You can now share your screen, and then we can begin the session.
Okay.
Awesome. You can see your screen now.
Just 1 second.
Okay. For those joining us, either you're on Zoom or YouTube, could you please proceed to the chat section to introduce yourself, tell us your name, tell us where you're joining from, and also what you hope to gain from the webinar today. Okay, Siddhant, I would also need you to do one quick thing before we start the session. On the top menu on your screen, could you please select, could you please disable participants annotation? A couple of you are drawing on your screen, on our screen currently. Could you please stop that? Siddhant, please disable participant annotation on Zoom.
I did that. And how do I remove the current notations?
Okay, can you please just go back there and just clear the annotations?
Sorry, I can't.
Okay, yeah. You can please reshare and disable participants annotation.
Okay. Better?
Yes, awesome.
Okay, all right.
We're ready for you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So today we're going to be talking about the brain. And just to give you an introduction, I wanted to show you what a real brain looks like. So this is a sheep's brain. And as you can see, it's very small. But our brain is much bigger than this. So we're going to be taking a look at this brain as well as we look at the different parts of the brain. So within our session, we're gonna be having, before you start though, I would like you to take this poll. The link is at the bottom, and it will just give you a few questions just to assess your knowledge. So please, if you could take that before we get started.
Okay, awesome. Thanks again, Siddhant. Hello, everyone. For those on the Zoom audience, currently in the Zoom room now, the poll is currently on your screen. So please just I've launched the polling now. So please just select the answers on your screen. But for those joining us on YouTube, could you please proceed to the Slido link in the on the presentation on your screen? The link is app.slido, but a shorter link is to go to visit Slido. Slido is sli.do. That's the website address, sli.do, and join the event with the event code is virtual brain. So proceed to sli.do and join this event with the virtual brain. Okay, so we're expecting more poll questions or poll responses by everyone. So
what was the event code again?
the event code is virtual brain. Virtual brain. Okay, we currently have 14 responses on Zoom. We're tracking the ones on Slido now, and we'll feed you back with those numbers, Siddhant.
Okay.
So I think in 1 more minute, we can proceed. Okay, we're hoping to get more responses. Only about half of the current Zoom audience are filled. If you've not, please take a minute to just answer those 3 questions. If you've also answered the questions, it would be great if you drop it in chat, in the chat box. Just drop I have in the chat section. Okay, we have a little above 50%. We're still expecting a few more people. Please just take a moment to answer. Awesome, awesome. I can see everyone that have answered. Okay, I'll end the polling now and share the results with you, Siddhant.
Okay.
Okay. Can you see the results?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, looks good. So I think we can get started now. So this is what the session's gonna look like in brief terms. So we're gonna talk about first the anatomy of the brain, what the different parts of the brain actually do. Then we're gonna move on and talk about the connections within the brain, how the brain is able to control our body. Third, we're gonna discuss optical illusions. So I hope you really enjoy that one. And finally, we're gonna talk about distractions. So we have a lot to cover, and I hope you gain something from this. Okay, so let's start off with the anatomy of the brain. So this is what the brain in we have different regions color coded. So these different regions each perform different tasks. So here is a brain model. As you can see, different colors of the brain represent different things. So let's talk about the different parts of the brain. The front of the brain is way up here, right next to our eyes. Let's say our eyes are right here. The front of our brain allows us to think, to plan, to do things, to solve math problems. Type in the chat if you like to solve math problems, or if you like math or science. All right, that's great. So this part of the brain really allows us to control that sort of thinking, the ability to do math, the ability to do science. On top of that, behind it, right here in the orange region, we have something called the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe allows us to feel things, to be able to touch, to feel. So if we ever feel something like slime or something mushy or gooey compared to something hard, the parietal lobe right here is allowing us to able to detect that. Below that, right here in the blue region on the diagram, we have something called the temporal lobe. Now the temporal lobe, if we look at it, is right next to our ears. What do you think the temporal lobe would control based on where it's located? Good job. Yes, awesome. The temporal lobe allows us to hear things. Finally, at the back, we have one more lobe, all the way at the back. It controls our eyesight. It's called the occipital lobe. Even though it's all the way at the back, for some reason, our eyes need to transmit information through our brain to get to the back of the brain, which allows us to control our eyesight. And then at the bottom here, this grayish sort of thing, this is actually called a mini brain or a cerebellum. And this allows us to balance ourselves, to move. So if we play a sport like basketball or if we jump and we need to land back on our feet, this is the part that allows us to do that. What do you think would happen if this part got damaged? If we jumped up, what would happen? Exactly. We would fall down. And as a result, we won't be able to balance. So it seems everyone got that. That's great. Okay, so let's move on. So just to revise, the frontal lobe, once again, controls our ability to plan, to think. And that's why the image is right there. The temporal lobe, next to our ears, controls our ability to hear. The parietal lobe at the top controls our ability to touch. And then the occipital lobe at the back controls our ability to see. And then these are what the parts of the brain in general look like with their description. Okay, so now I have a small game for you to play. So I'm going to show you different slides from different brain samples. So what does that mean? If you take a look at the brain under a microscope, you can see some really cool things. Tiny dots and streaks that represent different parts of the brain at a microscopic level. But different parts of the brain look different under a microscope. So let's take a look at what they look like and make sure to pay attention to the details of these slides because it might help you in a game we'll play later. Okay, so this is the cerebral cortex, the outer covering of our brain. that has all of these weird folds in between. So if we take our brain and we look at the outside, what we're really seeing, and we look at that part under microscope, this is what it would look like. What are some distinct things you notice about this microscope slide? What are some things that you may notice here in the slide? There are dots. That's a great point. Anything else? There's spots. Yep. There's also streaks here. Yep, and it's blue. That's a good observation too. So let's see why exactly this dot is there. These dots are actually the DNA in the cells. Do you know what DNA is? Okay, so we have one yes, which is great. The purple spots. What does DNA allow us to do? Anyone? Deoxyribonucleic acid, that's great. Close, it's deoxyribonucleic acid. They are what separates different species from one another. Great, that's a great answer right there. And that also makes people look different. Our fingerprints, everything that makes us different from each other comes from our DNA. So that's actually DNA right there. Those purple spots on the slide. And yes, it also allows the cell to replicate, which is awesome. Okay, so this is what the cerebral cortex looks like. There's a bunch of these DNA looking dots and there's streaks. Okay, so let's move on. This is the hippocampus. So now this is our brain. Imagine we cut half of it and looked inside. Weird, right? There's a bunch of weird structures here. There's a seahorse looking shaped thing. There's also a bunch of rounded curves. So one of these curves that goes to the bottom, it's not here, but in the diagram, that reddish sort of bulge, right? At the bottom of it is something called the hippocampus. Now the hippocampus is a tiny red bulge that controls our ability to remember things. And it's really important because without it, we'll forget everything. What do you think would happen if our hippocampus got damaged? Is there a condition you know of in which we're not able to remember things? Amnesia, awesome. That's exactly what I was looking for. So amnesia, and that results because this part of the brain might be damaged. Look, this part of the brain right here, this bulge, is called the amygdala. The amygdala controls our emotions. And as you can see, it's right next to the memory center, which is the hippocampus. So why is it that these two are so close? Why would the memory center be right next to the emotion center? Close. It allows us to feel because different memories give us different emotions. That's a great way to put it. It's actually the opposite. When something happens that elicits an emotion, so let's say there's something that makes you feel super happy. Let's say your favorite team, your sports team wins a game. Then instantly you're going to remember that moment, even after a long time has passed, how you felt in that moment, because the hippocampus and the amygdala are connected to each other. And as you can see under a microscope, the hippocampus looks very pretty. There seems to be different layers to it. There's an orange layer, on top of that is a pink layer, a white layer, and then another layer. So that's what a hippocampus looks like under a microscope. Finally, we have the spinal cord. So what is the spinal cord? Does anyone know? It's part of the nervous system, great. It connects to the brainstem. That's also a great point. It's the backbone. So as you mentioned, it's a bone. The spinal cord is actually covered in bones. and those bones protect us. So, yep, it is a tube-like structure. So if we look at the diagram right here, this is like a tube-like structure, and as you can see, there are tiny bumps in the middle. Those bumps are called vertebrae, and those vertebrae are made up of bones. What does the bone protect though? Inside of our bone, if we look at the structure of our brain, there's a connection right here. That connection runs right through our body. So technically, our brain is really connected to the rest of our body through this tube right here called the brainstem. And the bone in the spinal cord actually protects that brainstem and ensures nothing happens to it. What would happen if the spinal cord was damaged? The highway of nerves. I really like that term. Fall, close, sends commands from the brain. You get paralyzed. Exactly. We won't be able to walk. We won't be able to move. We undergo paralysis. So this is what the spinal cord looks like under the microscope. So now I have a challenge. So here is a slide. If you had to guess one of the three that we looked at, which one would you say it is? Is it the cerebral cortex, the hippocampus, or the spinal cord? Spinal cord, okay. Someone said cerebral cortex, someone said spinal cord. So we have a tie right now. Oh, more spinal, interesting. All right, so it seems sort of like a tie between cerebral cortex. Maybe some more people are saying cerebral cortex or spinal cord. So actually, believe it or not, this right here is actually the spinal cord. The spinal cord under even greater magnification. If we looked at it even more closely, that's why the dots are so much bigger. So, all right, so that's a great answer right there. So let's move on. So let's talk about the circuits within our brain. So within our brain, what if I told you we have tiny Lego blocks? These tiny Lego blocks connect to each other, and their connections end up creating our brain the way it is. How do these connections work? Well, one connection signals to another using electricity. So let's take a look at what that looks like in this video right here. Okay, so this is our brain, right? If we zoom in and try to take a look at those individual blocks, these blocks right here are called neurons. And these neurons send electrical signals that you can see in blue. These electrical signals travel from one neuron to the next and then to the next, so on and so forth. As those signals travel, they end up triggering the next response to occur in the next neuron. And why does this happen? Because of the electrical signal that's traveling, that gets converted into chemicals, and those chemicals trigger an electrical signal once again. So before we get confused, let's take a look at what that looks like. So this is a neuron chain. So one neuron, let's say a neuron in the cerebellum, right? It contacts a neuron in the spinal cord at the back. Then the spinal cord neuron goes way down, contacts another neuron until it eventually reaches our muscle. It contacts the muscle and tells our muscle using electricity to flex. So once our muscle flexes, we can raise our arm or we can drop it back down. And that's how the neurons in our brain are able to signal our body exactly what to do. And this is what that signal looks like. There's electricity that travels, gets converted into chemicals, those chemicals attach and trigger the electricity once again. All right, so let's take a look at this at a more microscopic level. Okay, so this is our neuron at the front. These are tiny branches. Those branches, if you were to say what they look like, what would you say? What else do they remind you of, these branches at the end? Trees, exactly. Branches, yep, branches of trees. In fact, they're called dendrites, and dendrites means tiny tree branches. That's why they're named that way. The signal, the red signals, they contact the dendrites from the previous neurons. And when the red signals contact the neurons, they end up creating tiny holes or tiny gaps. These gaps are like punctures in the neuron. So imagine you have a bucket that you put in the water, and then you pluck a hole into the bucket. What would happen to the bucket? If it's underwater? It would be punctured, and what would that cause? It will stay the same, full of water. So imagine it was initially filled with air. So the bucket will be full. Yep, water will rush into the bucket and it will sink. So that's exactly what I'm trying to get at. So the neurotransmitters, which is what these red dots are, they create holes in the next neuron. These holes allow there for a lot of the external stuff that's outside of the neuron to rush inside. And that puncture allows this material to come inside the neuron. Once it comes in, it ends up going until it reaches this part right here. What do you think that red dot is? What do you think that red dot contains? I should say. We talked about it earlier. It's a cell. Yep, this whole thing is a cell though. But nice guess. The cell body. I'll give you a hint. Yes, DNA. Great. DNA. This DNA right here allows our neuron to be our own rather than somebody else's. Okay, so it reaches this part which has the DNA, and then it travels along this long rod called the axon. So this long rod is really interesting. It's kind of like a train. Have you ever been on a train before? Yes? Okay, so here's my question. What happens to the train as you reach a train station stop? Anyone? It stops. Yep, it screeches to a stop and it slows down. So that's exactly what happens here. The electrical signal comes in, and then this is like a tunnel, right? The train goes right through the tunnel, rushes past it really fast. But here's the station stop. It slows down, the signal slows down, then it rushes again past this point, slows down, rushes, slows down, rushes until it reaches here. So that's what allows the signal to go really quickly. This tunnel right here. And that tunnel is called the myelin sheath. The chemicals are only able to access the station stops in between, which are called the nodes of Ranvier. Okay, so, and then they eventually reach the end here, which is called the terminal branch. Okay, so, and then after that, the signals leave the terminal branch, contact the next neuron, and that's how the signal proceeds. So let's take a look at, or let's try to build an actual circuit from the neurons that we just saw. So this is a video of what we have to try to build. All right, I'll need your help for this. So it's an electrical circuit, right? And we have to try to show how one neuron is signaling the next. So we have a switch, we have two bulbs, and we have the circuit in between. So if we looked at it through an electrical diagram, this is really what we have to build. But don't be scared. I'm right here. So we have different parts that we can use. This is the battery. And these are the blocks. I have a bulb. And I have a switch. All right, so let's go back. Okay, and let's pause the video right here. All right, so maybe that might help you figure out what we need to put. So here's our battery at the bottom. I'll give you two pieces. Which one should I connect to this switch first? Or to the battery, sorry. The top one or the bottom? Green one. The top. Good job. All right, so let's do that. Let's put this in. Let's put the next one, next top one also in. Okay, now what? Okay, so let's start off with this side. Okay? Now what do we connect to it? I have a switch or a long block. Block, okay? So let's connect a block to it. All right, this is a bit hard, okay? Okay, now I have either a T-shaped block, or wait, sorry. I either have this small block or I have this T block. Which one should I put? Small. Okay, good. Let's put a small block. Now, T-shaped block on top. Okay. Looking good so far. Okay, so now what do I connect to the T-shaped block? Should I connect the L block or should I connect a small block? Small block, okay, good. So, and we have another small block as you guys are mentioning. Okay, so let's connect the small block right here. Looking good so far. Okay, now we need to find a connection between this and this point. What should I put on this end right here? Anyone? Close. Bulb, exactly. So let's take the red bulb, put it on there. Okay. So far, so good. All right. Now, how do I connect this bulb here? What should I put here? Small block. Good job. Wow, you all are so smart. That's great. Okay. Now, how do I connect it? We have two parts left. Switch. Awesome. All right. So let's put a switch this way. Okay. Now let's take a look. If it should work, then we should see a light shine. There's an issue. Let's take a look at the issue. All right, it seems that there's some issue with this. But let's continue. Let's continue. What would you say I should put onto the switch? Small block. Okay. All right, now long block. Okay. Now small block. Okay. Now L block. Let's put an L block. Another. Close. Small block. Yep. Okay, now we're reaching the end. Now, on top of this, light bulb. Yep. Then we need to connect small block. Need to connect L block. And then how do we find the connection here? What should I put? Small and then L. Nice. Okay. Okay, this is how it should work. For some reason, oh, this one's lighting up. Okay, so nice. As you can tell, you clearly did this correctly because it's lighting up. Otherwise, none of them would. Okay, so good job. Awesome. All right, so let's move on. So this is what you made. You should be really proud. This looks really complex. So awesome job. Now let's talk about optical illusions. I bet you were waiting for this one. So what is this lobe called again that controls our ability to see? Anyone? At the back right here, remember? It's at the back. Controls our ability to see. Anyone remember this? Occipital, awesome. The occipital lobe, way at the back. Yep, occipital lobe. Our eyes are at the front here. our occipital lobe is way at the back. So clearly a lot has to happen between here and here for there to be a processing. So let's take a look at what happens. So this is our eyes, right? Let's take a look at a video revealing how this works. So imagine that this is our brain, all right? So this is our brain. It's going to be cut now by this red line, as you can tell. The red line's going to cut this. Okay. Now that's worrisome, but the top of the brain is falling off. Okay, falls down. Now we turn it to look at the top of that part. Okay, so we'll rotate. Okay, we reach the top of the brain. At the front would be the eyes. At the back here is the occipital lobe. Okay, so now let's take a look at what that connection in between looks like. So here's our eyes at the front, our occipital lobe at the back. Clearly a lot is happening in between. Okay, so let's take a look at it step by step. At the back of our eye, where the light ends up reaching, there's this layer right here. It's called the retina. Does anyone know what the retina does? Or have you ever heard of the term retina, let's say? Yes, okay. So what does a retinal scan do? On your phone, have you ever heard of a retinal scan? It scans your eye. So there's something called a retinal scan on our phone. The retina is at the back of our eye, and it's unique, like our fingerprints. So when we look at a phone and we do a retinal scan, it scans the back of our eye way at the back here and tells us that we are who we say we are and unlocks our phone. So another important function of the retina beyond a retinal scan is to see things. The retina has a bunch of cells. These cells are special and they detect different colors, different shades of colors, and they tell that information to the brain. But as you can see, there's something weird that happens here in the middle, in this blue region right here. So clearly one part of the brain, this is called an optic nerve, one part of the optic nerve is going to the right side, the other part is going to the left side. What does that mean about this eye? What does that indicate about the information from this eye? Yes, someone said rods and cones. That's great. It's in the retina. Okay, so, well, because this crossover happens, that means both sides of our brain are controlling the one eye. Same as here. Both sides of the brain are controlling this eye as well. That's why the crossover is so important. Okay, so now with that information, what our brain does is it takes what our eyes see and groups them into similar looking shapes, similar looking colors, similar looking sizes. And this is the picture that our brain ends up producing after looking at things that look similar. This is what a camera looks like.
Hi, Siddhant. Before we proceed, can I please interject?
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. If you have questions, yes, could you please just proceed to the chat area on both either Zoom or YouTube, wherever you're joining from. Please just drop them. The TechQuest team is literally tracking the group chats. So if you have questions and you like Siddhant to address any of your questions, please drop it in the group chat and we will attend to it in due time. Thank you.
Yes, I apologize for that. If you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, so let's look at what a camera looks like, right? They're tiny pixels, and these pixels have special colors. If we group a bunch of these pixels together, we get an image, even though it's a kind of blurry. But it's somewhat better than the brains. Why is our brain so weird in its picture it produces? Well, that's because the brain ends up taking shortcuts the way it looks at things. So let's take a look at one of these shortcuts. When you look at a light bulb, right, in the dark compared to in the light, when does the light bulb shine brighter? When do we think the light bulb looks brighter? In the dark or in the light? In the dark. Yep. In the dark. So that's because what we see around the light bulb really affects how we see the light bulb itself. It looks dark. In the dark, it looks super bright. So clearly, the things around the light bulb affect how we see the light bulb. Similarly, anything we see is affected by the stuff around it. And that's how optical illusions work. They manipulate the stuff around certain blocks, and that makes it look different when really it isn't. So let's take a look at that. So I want you to guess what's happening in the illusion and also why it's happening. So here's the first illusion. Does anyone want to tell me what's going on? There are a whole bunch of lines. Okay, here, I'll give you a hint. This line and this line, are they straight? No, exactly. Where are they a bit different? They're bent. Yep. They're bent in the middle. Yes, exactly. It seems to bulge in the middle, right? So, okay, so why does that happen? Why does it bulge? Anyone? Take a guess. It's okay not to know. It's a hard question. Because of the lines in the center. Great guess. That's exactly it. The lines. What do you notice about all of these lines? What are they doing? All of except the ones that are bulged. What are all the other lines doing? They're crossed. And there's intersection, as someone said. They're making a star. So, what does this remind you of? If you were to draw a line through a shape and those lines had to cross the opposite side, where else would you get a point in the center? In which other shape? In a triangle, in a square? Circle. Yep, in a circle. And that circle creates a circular effect. So as you can see, that's why over here we get sort of a circular effect. This line is so short while this one is so long. So our brain is trying to accommodate for that and tell us, you know what? This can't be this short. It has to be a bit longer. So we push it out a bit. And that's why we see this bulge at the top and the bottom. All right, next one. This is a Herman grid. What's going on here? This one's kind of cool. Number block, close. Okay, here's an intersect. There are dots, exactly. Awesome. There's tiny squares. I see squares. Okay, what happens at the intersection of those squares? Look at the intersection. Yep, you see flickering dots, right? Do you see that? Grayish sort of dots. Yep, within across from the squares in the intersections. Yeah. So there's grayish sort of dots and there's white lines that have those dots. So those dots, why are they there? Why do they flash up? Anyone have a guess? The colors. So black and white are contrasting colors. So these black squares, if you put tiny white spaces in between them, our eyes get so used to the black color that it retains with us. And the moment we transition to look at an intersection, our brain says, wait a minute, now we're seeing the opposite color. Why is that happening? So that split second, we see grayish sort of dot. But if we look at it long enough, that gray dot goes away. And if we keep moving our eyes through it, that gray dots end up flickering. That's how this one works. All right. Next one. This one's really cool. Anyone see what's going on here? Seems to move, right? Snakes are rotating, exactly. There's some rotation happening. And they're intertwined, exactly. But if you keep looking around, don't focus on one spot. Keep looking around. They seem to move and rotate. Yep, so that's exactly right. Why does this happen? It's a whirlpool. Because of the lines. Close. It's a circular effect. Also a good idea. Believe it or not, it's actually because of the colors of this. It's a good idea, but the colors, you see the pink and green. So our eyes take in light colors very easily. So pink or purple and green, they end up looking at that and they skip over the darker colors. So the moment we take a look at this part, we skip over the next one and keep on looking around until we see some sort of rotation. So that's how that one works. This one's really interesting. This is square A. This is square B. Which one is darker, A or B? A. Someone said B. A. Okay, so almost everyone's saying A. All right. Believe it or not, this was a trick question. They're the exact same color. See? If you draw a line through them, you can clearly tell their shade is the same. Wow, that's so cool, right? Why does this happen? Yeah, it's the same color. Anyone have any ideas why might this happen? Why we see A to be darker than B? Shadow? Number one answer, that's shadow. There's a second answer too. Reflection, close. I'll give you a hint. Look at the squares around A and around B. What's the difference between them? Think of the light bulb in the dark versus the light bulb in the light. Yes, there are black squares, the colors of the squares around them. So remember, the black and white, they're contrasting, right? So the black squares around B are darker. The squares around A are lighter. Remember the light bulb we were talking about. When you see a light bulb in the dark, it looks brighter than if you see it in the daylight. Similarly, square A, if you put it amongst blocks that end up looking lighter, automatically your brain tells you that block is going to be darker than it really is. And B, the opposite effect occurs. You put it with really dark squares, your brain tells you that square must look really light. And that's why we see such a big difference. Okay, and this is the final one. So type your answer to this question. Do you see this dress to be black or white, or white, black and blue, or white and gold? White and gold. Interesting. Someone said purple and gold. Black and blue. Wow, as you can see, there's a lot of people having different answers here. This was a famous dress that was posted on social media. And most of the people ended up saying different things, or either it was white and gold or black and blue. So there seems to be sort of a 50-50 split. So they verified this dress and said it was actually black and blue. Why might people say it's white and gold? What would they think about the background? Is it dark or is it lighter than someone who says white and gold? I mean, someone who says black and blue. Lighter? Anyone else? Okay, we have a lot of responses for lighter. Okay, so believe it or not, if it's white and gold, think of the light bulb trick again. If it's white and gold, we're seeing the dress to be much lighter because the background clearly must be darker. Similarly, the people who saw black and blue thought this must be in somewhat of a store. So there's a lot of lights that are there in the store, and that causes the background to be much lighter. That's why we might see black and blue instead. All right, so that was that. Okay, so before we move on to the last one, I want to ask you, do you have any questions for me right now?
Hi, Siddhant.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier in the session, someone asked for clarifications on what axon mean.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so let's just go quickly back to that. Okay, so let's go even before this.
So if you have questions, please also drop them in the chat and we'll attend to them.
Okay. All right. Yeah, pose your question too, and I will go over it. So anyway, this is the axon right here. The axon is like a tube. Okay, imagine an electrical wire that has rubber around it, right? The electrical wire transports electricity. Similarly, this axon is like an electrical wire. It's really small and we can only see it under a microscope, but this wire is covered with that rubber coating. Really, in our brain, it's actually not rubber, it's used with fat instead. But there are holes in between here. And those holes, what they end up doing is slowing down the signal. So an axon, what it does is really it ends up taking an electrical signal and ends up rushing it through here. There's actually a condition called multiple sclerosis. If this myelin sheath that's covering the axon is broken or damaged, then the signal ends up going very slowly, and that slow signal ends up making people not be able to think as fast. And as a result, we have a disease called multiple sclerosis that's associated with that. And really, the axon's role is just to speed up the signal and get it to the next neuron for communication. I hope that makes more sense. Okay, so next question. Um, how is information encoded by neurons? Great question. So remember, this is the DNA right here in the cell body in the middle. So every cell in our body is made up of DNA, right? It has DNA at least, except red blood cells. But let's not talk about that right now. So within our neurons, we also have DNA, and the DNA codes for things called proteins. These proteins are maybe things like these neurotransmitters here. They may be what allows these branches to form. They may be what allows the myelin sheath to form, stuff like that. The proteins end up constructing this neuron as it is, and it allows the neuron to work the way it is. That's how the neurons are able to understand exactly how they work and how they're supposed to work because of the DNA. So, what can you say about people having short and long sight? Okay, so that's an interesting question. So let's go to the vision part right here. Okay, so imagine this is our eye, right? What happens with short-sighted or long-sighted people? This is a lens right here. This filling you see, that lens is actually ends up changing. So that causes for short-sighted people, either it ends up the lens ends up contracting the light, as you can see, either too close or too far from the retina. And when that happens, that causes us to see short-sighted or long-sighted, depending on how that lens changes. So what do glasses do right here? The glasses end up acting as another lens in front and causes that contraction to happen earlier. So instead of going this way, it might go this way instead and make the contraction easier of the light. And then our retina is able to see that more easily. Which code makes the brain work? The code that makes the brain work is really electricity and chemicals. So let me put it this way. The DNA is what makes the neurons the way they are. The electricity within them that's created by the ions or the electrical signals, the dots right here, that electrical difference is what allows the electricity to travel. And that's what ultimately allows us to transport the signal. What is the maximum capacity of the brain in terms of storage? Interesting question. I'm actually not sure about that one. But I'm sure maybe we can Google it later and get back to you on that one. Is it true that the smartest person in the world has not used up to 20% of his brain? So I'm not sure about this, but one of my teachers actually did tell me that it's not true that we use only 20% of our brain. We actually use a lot of it. The reason why people say we use 20% of it is because the 20% has direct function, but other stuff has to be done within the brain. Like there has to be communication that's done and stuff like that. That's why people say it's only 20%, but it's much more. What is the maximum capacity of the brain? Oh, I'm not sure. How much brain power do we use? Okay, I'm going to talk about that in distractions. So wait up for that. How do we perceive pain? Okay, so tell me once again which part of the brain ends up controlling our ability to touch? Which lobe? Anyone remember? Parietal, exactly. Great job. The parietal lobe. So what happens when we touch? Well, when we touch, there's a signal that's received by neuron on our skin. That signal ends up traveling through our spine and goes to our parietal lobe. And our parietal lobe tells us that something's touching us. For pain, it's a special type of touch receptor. And that touch receptor, when there's pain, it ends up going back and telling us that we're feeling something that's bad for us. Okay, so let's see the next one. What is responsible for mental disorders? There's many different things that might happen. Each mental disorder is different. I'm going to talk about one of them, ADHD, in the distraction section. Does mutations affect brain function? Certainly, that can happen. Many people think that autism and conditions like that might be related to genetic disorders. So maybe there's certain mutations in certain genes within our DNA that may allow us to understand why autism might occur. What is the difference between a genius brain and a normal person brain? Okay, so why are we smarter than elephants? That's another way of asking that question. And that's because of the folds on our brain. So our brain has these weird folds, right? The folds are like if you take a piece of paper and crumple it into a small amount of area, the brain ends up having much more space within that small area. And our brain is like that. An elephant's brain, not so much. So a smarter person, it's not just their brain, but it's their effort they put in. But within their anatomy, they have more folds. Um, what is what was the actual color of the dress? Black and blue. Does the braid determine? It's the folds that determine. Is there sickness where people don't feel pain? Interesting question. There's actually this special material that people use. It comes from puffer fish. And if you spread that on your body, right, that allows you to not feel pain anymore. What happens when you undergo surgery? There's something called anesthesia that's applied. And that anesthesia allows you to not feel that pain anymore. So we can do that, but I don't know if there's an actual condition that allows us to not feel pain anymore. But there is one that allows us to not feel touch anymore. Why are brains in this shape? Well, the reason why is because it was evolutionary beneficial. So there's something called natural selection, which means that we end up having to experience certain factors in our environment that allow us to be the way we are. And the way our brain is shaped allowed us to be able to think more efficiently and more smartly. And that's why the brain is best suited the way it is for us.
Awesome. Thanks, Siddhant. Can we please also proceed to,
yes.
Other? So for other questions that are not attended to yet, we'll compile responses and then put that on our website sometime next week. An email communication will be made on that. So please keep an eye out for that.
All right. So then we're going to talk about our last activity, which is distractions. So how do distractions work? Well, let's take a look at this. So our eyes are focused so much on the car while it's moving that we ignore the sun in the background. Why does that happen? Well, our brain has waves, believe it or not. So one of the questions before was about was related to this. So brain waves, how do they work? Well, within our body, the neurons, they send electricity, remember? So sometimes within the certain part of the brain, when a lot of neurons are firing, when that part of the brain is really active, then it emits a signal, an electrical signal, and that signal can be recorded as a brain wave. So let's take a look at what that would look like. So imagine our entire brain were to be activated. So as you can see, an electroencephalography, they actually look at this pattern. When the brain is really activated, it shines. And the scientists take this information and establish why this happens. So using this information, we can see which part of our brains are more active when we're doing certain things like sleeping or eating. Okay, so when we watch a movie, our brainwaves look very similar because we're very focused on the same things. If we look at an action movie with a bunch of cars flipping around, we're so focused on the car that all of our brains are really focused on the same thing. So our brains work the same way. The similar parts of our brains are activated. So the waves in the brain are also similar. In a documentary, people's brains are not as similarly activated. Why would you say that is? Why might this happen? What does that indicate about the people? Are they focused on the movie or not so much? Not so much, exactly. So they're not so focused on the movie. Yep. So there's a lot of conditions that are related to this ability to focus. The major one is ADHD. ADHD keeps us distracted. It makes it hard for people to sit down and focus. And scientists are trying to research what exact part is responsible for allowing us to focus. So far, they've determined it's the frontal lobe right here, the prefrontal cortex at the bottom, that's really responsible for allowing us to focus. So ADHD is actually related to the frontal lobe, they've seen. And that's why it makes us very hyper. There's also a lot of things that are associated with distractions. These days, cell phones are the biggest thing. If you drive and you text, it's very bad, but there's sort of a lack of focus on our ability to drive that may cause an accident or something of that sort. And of course, other bad things like smoking, alcohol, stuff like that. And that's why our brain is really important. Our frontal lobe, which allows us to think, to be able to plan and make good decisions, we have to trust that rather than our amygdala, which remember is our emotion center. Now let's play a final game. This one's interesting. So you will have to pay attention and count the number of plants in the video. Okay? The videos are going to show these plants. You have to try to count the number of them, okay? So make sure to pay attention. All right, so here's my question. How many times did the smiley face pop up? Did you even realize that? Well, you were so focused on the plants that you may not have even realized that on the top right, the bottom left, the bottom left and bottom right corners, there were smiley faces popping up. Oh, someone did see it. Okay, so what's your guess? How many smiley faces popped up? 7, 8, 4, 4. Well, believe it or not, there were 16. 16 smiley faces popped up. We were so focused on the plants that we forgot to look around, right? That's why distractions can make us end up focusing too much on things that are not so important. And that's how our brain works. It hates to multitask and do many things at once. It prefers going about things easily and looking at things one at a time. Okay, so finally, I want to talk about why should we study the brain. So of course, it's really important for us to understand the brain because it helps us learn a lot about the science behind it. There's a lot of conditions, dementias, autism, ADHD, stuff like that, that are within the brain. And if we discuss the brain and understand the brain, perhaps one day we can find the cures to them. It may help us even explore technologies like artificial intelligence that allows us to discover new things. It also is really important to educate yourself and learn about science to help establish a good future. Education allows you to become a better educated in your profession and allows you to perhaps pursue a profession that you may like to pursue within the field of sciences. All right, so thank you so much for joining the session. I'm so excited to have been here, and I really hope you all enjoyed. Also, I was hoping that you could take the poll once again at the end, just to see your responses and what their response rate are like compared to the introduction. Thank you.
Awesome, Siddhant. Thank you so much for an eye-opening session. Hi, everyone. So I would relaunch the poll now. For the Zoom audience, it will pop up on your screen. But for those joining us on YouTube, could you please proceed to Slido to answer the polls? So the link is on the screen. Or you could just proceed to Slido, that's sli.do, and enter virtual brain as the event code. So for those on Zoom, I believe you can now see the polls on your screen. Kindly answer the questions so we can access how well you learned during today's session.
I'm really glad you all enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Siddhant. It was really eye-opening.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have less than half of the attendees currently in this webinar room. We still hope a couple of you will still answer. Yeah, thank you. So if you've answered the question, the polls like we did earlier, could you please just drop a message? Just drop in your chat section that you have answered the poll. Okay, so we currently have almost half of the attendees. We're still expecting a few more responses. Awesome, 50% have voted no, 52%, 54, 56. In case you're wondering, there are just 3 questions, so it will take less than 30 seconds of your time. Just to reiterate, if you're joining us on YouTube, could you please proceed to Slido? Slido is sli.do and enter virtual brain as the event code. You would also be able to take this same poll on Slido. Brain is the event code. Okay, we have 59% votes. 9% have voted. All right, so I would share the results now.
Okay.
Can you see the results, Siddhant?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wow,
So
you
what do
all,
you think?
their understanding definitely increased, which is awesome. There's a lot more correct responses than before the session.
Okay, okay. That's really great to hear. All right, so with this, we have gradually come to the end of the webinar series. If you still have questions, unanswered questions, could you please just proceed to the chat section and drop them? We'll collect those questions and then put up a blog post on our website sometime next week for all the unanswered questions to be answered. Before we go, I would also like to talk about what we do at TechQuest. So TechQuest Academy, we're a non-profit organization. We provide education technology content, resources and tools for the delivery of ICT, digital literacy and STEM programs to young Africans at scale. We believe STEM is the foundation for modern day economic growth and equipping young ones with these skills will be critical for Africa's rise in the digital economy. We would also like to, could you please just take a minute to also give us some feedback? I've also put up another poll for those on YouTube and even for those on Zoom, pardon me. And if on YouTube, please proceed to YouTube to do that. Okay, so let me continue. We would also love to get feedback from you. Could you all please bookmark this link? tqstem.org, that's our website, /TVB, that's the virtual brain feedback. It's a form. You would fill that form in less than a minute. We'd just like to get some feedback from you, how the session went, what you think we can do well, how we can improve, and what would you would even like to be discussed in the upcoming TQ webinar series. To sponsor and support our programs, could kindly visit tqstem.org/donate or contact us at partner at tqstem.org. Would you also like to get instant updates about our upcoming webinars and our workshops? Please follow us on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, that's twitter.com/TechQuestCamp. Same for Facebook. All these things will be dropped in the chat section, so kindly keep an eye out for that, and then you can just click those links and follow us. Also on YouTube and Eventbrite at TechQuest Academy. We've gradually come to the end of the session. On behalf of the TechQuest team, I want to say a special thank you to Siddhant, the founder of Brain Brunch, for taking this time out to educate us about the virtual brain today. According to the feedback I'm seeing here, it's pretty impressive what you have exposed everyone to today. So I'm sharing the webinar feedback with you so you can see. I would also say after this session. On behalf of the TechQuest team and on behalf of today's webinar. So keep an eye out on all our social media platforms for upcoming webinar series. Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of your day, everyone. Bye.